Welcome to By-the-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekachak.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. And hello and welcome to the 50th episode of By-the-Bywater. Hey! Very unexpected that this has all happened in the way it has. I just will flat out say, deeply moved. Thank you all very much for showing up. That we're all kind of just amazed, really.
Yeah, I can't believe people came. This is so exciting. This is so exciting.
50 is like, how did we get here?
I do feel like this is partially my fault. I moved here, which is sort of equidistant from Jared and Ned, and we were like, let's meet up and record a podcast episode together.
And we were just thinking maybe just somewhere like, sit around a table and just, sort of like, oh, hey, we're actually seeing each other in the same place at the same time instead of just on the computer screen as we've been doing for, four little plus years now. But then it became a thing. And we'd like to thank Chris for helping it to be a thing. So big applause to him over there. And, before we get into things, and boy, do we have things to talk about. So we've been spending the past few weeks going, why do we do this again?
So sorry.
Because we love it.
So sorry.
even as we've grown. For those who may be just unfamiliar, it's like, okay, how did it even start? So this will be the one bit of sentimentalism we'll allow ourselves here with the fact that we have reached 50. It was like, how did this happen in the first place? So long and short of it, you can thank that website that is now falling apart day by day, if not hour by hour, Twitter. Back in 2018, there I was on Twitter, and I have an interest in things that involve financial tomfoolery, grift, graft, and all the other things like that, because I just like idiots who do that and idiots who fall for it. And so it turns out that there was this person who somehow got RT'd into my feed who had a podcast called American Grift. That person happens to be sitting right next to me over here, Oriana.
The now defunct American Grift. I keep meaning to resurrect it, and it doesn't
There's just
quite
too much grift.
There's too much, right? How can you possibly choose one?
You'd have to go weekly at this point, if not daily. And so it was one of those things like, pretty cool. I'll follow her on Twitter. I'd like to see more of what her podcast is. And somewhere along the line, she posted a photo saying, hey, I'd like to show off some tattoos here, which you might know she has. And I'm like, oh, Tengwar and the moon tree from the gate and the similar things. Tolkien fan. Nice. I said as much because I have been a Tolkien fan for a long, long time. A little more about that in a second. Mm-hmm. Around the same time, and we still haven't figured out who followed who first, but at some point, Jared and I...
You definitely followed me.
Yeah, that sounds more accurate, yeah. So I fully believe this to be true. So, and basically I'm like, oh, who's this person? And I'm like, okay, I'm in Seattle. Oh, amazing reads of all sorts of fashion shows, like making them all out to be like, taking photos from like, from current modern day, just fashion things from various houses and just all these amazing descriptions, like they're all like, medieval characters or just like things like this. It's sort of like, this is kind of great. Who is this person? I'll happily follow. It's like, oh, okay, Jared's also just sort of a general medievalist. Oh, does his own art. Oh, wait a minute. Tolkien art. Hey, nice. And even more reason to follow. It's like, okay, great. So I follow them both. Then around the end of 2018, there I am having drinks with my friend Vahan, who was visiting SF to see his sister who was in nursing school, and we went to a great gin bar, Whitechapel. It's very good. And I think it's still around. Anyway, and we talked about everything and anything else, but somewhere I just remember that I got in the car home on the way back, and I was sort of thinking to myself in this haze of my happy gin cocktails, I'm like, podcast would be good. Why not a Tolkien podcast? Why not? And why not those two? They seem like they could be interested. One of them already does a podcast. Maybe Jared might be interested as well. And then it all happened. And then as it was all coming together, it's sort of like, well, where are we hosted? What will we do? And I'm like, wait a minute. I know a guy who runs a podcast network. And that guy has been the guy over there in the pink scarf all this time. And I said, hey, Chris, we have an idea of a Tolkien podcast. He's like, well, we already have a literary podcast. I'm like, well, we're all Tolkien. He went, okay. And he designed the art and he did the thing. We came up with the name And here we are. So that is, in brief, the story of it. If you want to hear about how we individually became Tolkien fans and our backgrounds on it, check our first episode, which is rough in the editing parts. That's all on me. I was still learning my craft, but it basically gives you an idea of where we're all coming from. And I won't repeat that because I've done too much talking intro already. But that's our story. We're all glad you're here. We didn't ever expect this to ever happen, to have a crowd like this. We really appreciate it. So thank you all very much indeed. And I guess shall we just get right into the news? Are you ready over there?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whenever the news happens, we are sometimes pained, and we've got some stuff going on to it. So, okay, let me know. Are you ready to go, Jared? Here we go.
This news section is really funny to me. So there's no major news to report this time around in terms of like actual books or new productions or the like, but there are two very, very deeply hilarious stories to report about involving Amazon's Rings of Power series, but for two totally different reasons. The first is more a confirming of suspicions, ours at least, in a lengthy piece for a Hollywood Reporter weighing up what the current situation is with Amazon Studios under its lead Jen Psaki. Reporter Kim Masters led with some astonishing news. While the series debuted strongly, its viewership ebbed away over the course of the first season run, as we discussed last fall, and ended up with only a 37% completion rate from first episode to last among potential viewers. So most people did not finish the show. That is a notably very bad performance. Netflix has canceled some of its own series from not even reaching 50%. And while there are various excuses made, it does match with our sense that the series made a big initial splash and then almost immediately sank to the bottom of the pool. Who knows what'll happen with the second season, but there you go. Okay, this one's my favorite. In the meantime, Amazon itself, along with the Tolkien estate, was recently sued by a fanfic writer claiming that ideas from his work were stolen in order to create the Rings of Power series. This, in and of itself, seems like a bit of a curious move, but it's made even worse by the fact that this writer's own work is, in fact, a totally unauthorized full sequel to The Lord of the Rings called The War of the Rings. And the first book of this trilogy is called The Fellowship of the King. And he's made various characters that Tolkien created the center of his own particular story. To say this gets even more ridiculous as it goes is an understatement, but we would like to congratulate the writer for giving us a good laugh and hope he is prepared to be sued out of existence.
Absolutely ethered.
Yeah, the lawsuit is like, they took my work and they're using, but if you look at the book blurb, it's like Sam's daughter is preparing for her debutante ball, and then
I really need to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Eleanor Gamgee is having a debutante ball in the Shire, and she's so nervous about it. That sounds like Tolkien to me?
Yeah,
utterly pure.
Famously interested in the lives of young women.
$250 million is what he is suing for. His name is Demetrius Polychron.
He has an awesome Greek name, Demetrius Polychron.
Yeah,
I hope that's
he's
the
used it
authorial
for
name
evil.
because you can't pay to have a Greek name like that. Except that he's out of his mind.
The book didn't become commercially available until November of last year, and I don't know if anyone watched the Rings of Power show.
It's fine if you didn't.
Yeah, right. It's also fine if you did and you liked it.
Yes.
If you did and you liked it, that's great. Liking things is good. But the Rings of Power started Labor Day, right after Labor Day, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or during, anyway. So the timelines here do not match up, and I don't know. Is this guy suffering from some kind of brain tumor, maybe, or something?
The lawsuit, I think, says that he sent it to Tolkien's grandson and was like, "Will you review my book?" Which is the confidence,
the audacity.
I can only aspire to that level, but.
I mean,
that's what the suit's based on, is that he claims to have sent the book to people who then were involved in the production of the thing. This is why you don't read fanfic based on your work.
Yeah.
This is,
TV producers will not accept
You're just not
any kind of script.
And, we'd like to point out that, these books that this guy had already written and claimed to rip off them, these are sequels to Lord of the Rings. Yeah. You might recall, if you've seen it, that the Rings of Power series is a prequel to the Lord of the Rings. So,
well, look, there's a Hobbit named Eleanor in both of these properties. So
God,
I think that's worth $250 million personally.
I mean, we should think about it this way. If the idea is to take $250 million from Jeff Bezos,
I know
gonna miss it.
I know.
I mean, maybe we're looking about this all wrong.
No, it's 1,000% just to get eyes on his book.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which is weird because he is going to have to stop selling it.
Yeah.
Like, there's just no world in which he gets to
Amazon
continue
even took the
doing
book's
this.
page down. Like they're
Which that's also amazing. Was he was selling it on Amazon?
And for months, apparently.
Yeah.
It's like half a year.
Yeah,
It's like,
no
wait a
one
minute.
noticed. No one noticed.
So he had to sue them to get it noticed.
Which is like just galaxy brain.
Yeah.
Amazing. 2023 off
I mean,
to
I'm
a
taking
great
notes.
start.
This is my new business model.
Yeah,
Really a way to
forget
go.
being published with Tor.
Yeah.
Just-
debut novel coming next year from Thorin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have announced it before. We'll announce it
Yeah,
again.
I mean,
when the pre-order link
Continually.
goes live, you will
Yeah.
please all buy copies.
That
but-
episode's just going to be about me.
Yes,
Yeah.
we will do it, and it won't be labeled SpawnCon, and we'll get sued by the FTC or something.
Amazing how it works. I mean, we have reviewed our 13th episode, our first anniversary episode. I forced these poor people here to have to read a noticeably hilarious sequel, essentially Lord of the Rings, with all the names changed, that was formerly published, called The Silver Call Duology. I feel even stupider for having to say that title, by the way.
You know, I yearn for those days.
I
now.
do too, actually. At least he didn't like just kind of erase the top part of the R in
Yeah.
like, you know, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship of the King. Like,
He put some thought into it.
yeah.
It wasn't good.
Right. But it is like a slightly more creative work
Yeah.
than what we are being presented with.
And like the one actual review we found of this Fellowship of the King thing we found, basically among his notes, among other things that I won't bother going into, they said, and it shows that it has more violence that could have been showed in Tolkien's time. I'm like, that's exactly what we need, a hyper-violent Lord of the Rings. Well done.
Zack Snyder's Fellowship of the King
Eli Roth
coming to
Fellowship of the
Netflix.
King.
Oh my God.
No. So sort of a dry news month, but thank you, Demetrius Polychron. We appreciate the laugh.
I don't think it was. This is one of my favorite news things to read so far. Was this
It's a real
lawsuit.
double whammy of fucking stupid.
Yeah.
I try to avoid cursing normally, but
Yeah.
this really warrants it, I think.
Every now and then we can indulge.
And as for the Ring of Power itself, apparently only getting 1/3 of its initial viewers to complete the series, I think that says it all on its own.
Yeah.
Episode
Again-
44 for our rant.
If you liked the show, that's great. I really don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but
Find joy where you can.
yes, we thought it was really awful and hated it.
We found joy in that.
We really had a great time talking about it. But just for like some context, it's not uncommon for network television shows to lose about 50% of their audience from premiere to end of the season. It does happen. Anything below that, though, is really cause for concern, especially if you've spent $700+ million on just one season
About
alone.
300 million starving orphans worth of
Yeah.
money.
Just
Or,
like-
if you will, one Fox News settlement.
Ooh.
Imagine
Topical.
It is almost the same exact amount. Makes you wonder.
It is. Oh, man. Conspiracies abound.
I do still think Rings of Power was a money laundering scheme.
I wouldn't
fully
be
believe that.
surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
Although that
we
doesn't.
made jokes about how Bezos bought New Zealand, and frankly, we have yet to see anything to go against this idea that he just simply did that and it's sort of like going.
Although now they moved production to England.
They
so
used it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Terrible. So. Well, there is one late-breaking bit of news that actually leads into our main topic that we'll mention, that the Australian comedian Barry Humphries, most famously known for Dame Edna Everage, passed on today. Now, the only reason why we're bringing this up is that Barry had a role in a certain series of films that we're about to talk about. Like everything else in these series of films, it could have been better. But I think it's about time. It was Oriana's choice of topic. This is why we're here. We're going to talk about something, and we have thoughts. So, Oriana, please take it away.
took a really big breath to sigh, and then the music played, and so that didn't work. But like, where do we even begin with the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies? Like, certainly not at the beginning, because that's a very good place to start. But instead, I think what we'll do is have like a really long, unnecessary, like, prologue that covers a single incident that no one actually wants to see. So here's my prologue. I was genuinely excited about the first Hobbit movie. I had really loved the Lord of the Rings movies, of course, and I was like 25, which is the perfect age for that first hit of nostalgia. And like, the casting was really, really great. And so a friend and I got tickets to a midnight show, and I remember both of us exiting the theater and walking to the subway at 4 a.m. or something. And really, it's not that we didn't like it, we kept saying to each other, but maybe we won't go see the next one at midnight. And we didn't. The second movie, I was like, well, Benedict Cumberbatch job. No, he was fine as Smaug. And then I literally have no memory whatsoever of seeing the third movie. I know I must have, but I have no recollection. And what's fascinating after watching all of them is like how boring they are. I was genuinely really bored, and we'll discuss that. But I am going to steal an observation that Jared made in our little group chat, which is how oddly similar these movies are to Amazon's Rings of Power show, which is that every action and character is simultaneously over-motivated or over-explained, and yet because these motivations and explanations are just completely disconnected from the original story's construction, you never really fully understand why anyone is doing anything outside of the specific scene. The logic of the scene is okay, I can get that. And then as soon as the scene is over, you're like, what the fuck just happened?
It's Lynchian.
Why it is. Aside from a handful of genuinely lovely moments, I think we can agree, the films just kind of slide off of my brain, and I think lots of other people's as well. But I don't know, it's just so weird that this happened, because the Hobbit movies have basically the same creative team and crew as the Lord of the Rings films. So, what happened here? And there's a lot that happened, it turns out. And if you haven't watched Lindsay Ellis's 3-part video essay on that, it's on YouTube or Nebula, and it's great. So, but very briefly, I will kind of explain what happened, which is this was at some point going to be 2 movies directed and written in part by Guillermo del Toro, which sounds so cool, right? Yeah. And then the story is that the movie was taking too long to be greenlit officially by the studios, and so Del Toro had to leave. I absolutely do not believe this excuse. I am pretty sure that Del Toro had a sort of dark but more whimsical tone that did not sufficiently feed into the tone and story of the Lord of the Rings films, which is what the studios actually wanted. And so to keep production in New Zealand, Peter Jackson steps back in as director and co-writer with Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh. And for some reason that has never been properly explained, there was no pre-production time whatsoever. I think they had a few months.
It was absurd. It was
really crazy, considering they had years to do pre-production on the Lord of the Rings films, and they were going to shoot these movies once again simultaneously. Now, because there were 5 studios involved in the film rights of this, that meant 5 studios all needed to make money. on the first two movies, which is why Warner Brothers, in all its infinite wisdom, but please still give me a job writing on one of your shows, they decided that they needed to make more money, and they needed to turn this 280-page book, which I was supposed to bring on stage with me and forgot. This 280-page book is going to become 3 movies now, and it feels like that decision was made. It was certainly announced about 6 months before the premiere of the first movie. And then there is a whole other thing that maybe we'll get to about New Zealand's labor laws being actually changed to keep this production there, because Warner Brothers wanted slightly more money. It's pretty amazing. The bad way, the bad amazing. And that is our prologue, I suppose. It's a prologue, but it's also only a partial explanation for why these movies are just such an awful, unmemorable mess. Like, as with the Amazon series, there are these handful of moments that are just surrounded by baffling choices and a frame rate that renders the entire affair into a surreal nightmare. So, gentlemen, let's start easy. What do you remember of seeing these movies when they came out, and how did your opinion change or not change when you watched them again?
All right, Jared, you want to start it off?
So I did not go see them in theaters because I was convinced they would be bad, and as always, I was right.
Oh no, Cassandra over here.
Yes. Waiting until they came out on cable. I was still living at home at the time, and my mom and sister started watching the first one, and I was like, I know this is a visual gag, I'm sorry. I was just like, is that really what's happening? Are we doing that? And I started live tweeting it, and my sister got mad at me because she was enjoying it. If she's listening, I'm sorry. And I was like, that's terrible. I'm not watching the other two. And then I kind of ended up watching them kind of the same way I ended up watching Inception, where I was sitting at a table on the other end of a room from the screen where the two were playing. So I didn't really remember the second two at all. And then rewatching them for this, even now, I don't really remember them.
It's so weird.
There's a few moments
Yeah.
that I remember either because they're actually really lovely or because they are so stupid that they are lodged in my brain permanently as an example of how not to tell a story.
Well, as for me, where to begin? For my sins, I did see all 3 movies in the theaters as they came out. I was suspicious. I pretty much said that as soon as I got the word that things had changed from 2 to 3 films, I was already sort of like, well, you could tell the story in just 1 film, honestly. So 2, I get it, okay. So when the announcement of 3 films came, I went, and at that point I remember saying things to friends along the lines of, I just want a good Smaug the dragon, which we'll get to that. But I figured everything else was going to be like essentially window dressing, frosting, and I tried to dig up my old quote about this somewhere in the depths of time on Facebook or somewhere else, but I remember saying something like this after I saw the first movie, and just like on the day or two it opened, I said something like, that was one of the most over-the-top ridiculous indulgence experiences I have seen in my entire life. I am mildly terrified that this film exists. I stick with that assessment, and I've had more to say since. However, I'm going to back up a bit because both Oriana and Jared have introduced something I want to sort of throw in, a very particular term that has come up. I'm going to start by actually asking folks here in the audience, obviously if you're listening you can't see this, but who here saw the films at the time they were released? Anybody? Okay, fair enough.
Wow.
I'm so sorry.
Who here hasn't, yeah, indeed. Who here hasn't thought about them since they were released? All right. This is going to be, I'm going to introduce a term here from the writer, film writer, and pop culture writer Nathan Rabin. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Most well known for introducing the concept of the manic pixie dream girl as a trope, as a concept. However, he's had many other things. He introduced a wonderful term some years ago which describes the Hobbit movies to a T. Forgot busters.
Yeah.
Blockbusters, designed to be blockbusters, that were huge in their moment and made a reasonable amount of money that nobody ever thinks about ever again. They are a cultural deadweight. And that's exactly what's happened to these movies. And there's much more to say about this, but just from vibes alone, dare I say, if you're talking about going online and think like, Tolkien fandom, what's out there? You will find 8 million memes from the original Jackson Lord of the Rings films. You will find them constantly. They have been reworked. They have been repurposed. You do not simply walk into Mordor again and again and again, to Jane, just one of the many famous ones. How many memes are there for the Hobbit movies? None. Maybe 1 or 2 out there in the wild somewhere in some dark corner, never to be seen again. But they just pretty much, they're sort of like, it's like, we will never speak of them again. We will never care about them again. The anniversary of the first film was this past December, was of the first Hobbit film. Did anyone care talking about it? Not a single soul.
Where were our oral histories? Like, celebrate? I didn't see any.
Never none. Whereas comparatively, in 2021, Polygon, the site, literally ran a series for an entire year of nothing but essays about the Lord of the Rings films for its 20th anniversary. They sure didn't do anything like that for the Hobbit movies, and no other site did that too. And so again, a forgot buster is what to call these films. It's like stripped away from any emotion or feeling we might have for the original story, which is in there somewhere if you squint. And you have, as I said, something that is cultural deadweight. Oodles and oodles of products, of books, of tie-ins.
Oh my God,
the
Denny's breakfasts. Do we all remember?
Oh man,
did anyone eat one of the Denny's Hobbit breakfasts?
What was it like?
Yeah.
I live in Idaho.
And you're still here and you're alive. It didn't kill you. Well done.
Amazing.
So yeah, Kelly's like, what was it? Gandalf's Gobble Melt or something like that.
Oh.
All the menu names had things that sounded like, as a friend of mine said, these all sound like extremely depraved acts. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Thanks, Denny's. Well done.
Just ordering the Hobbit hole at a Denny's in Idaho.
Oh,
that sounds that's a very
we're verging onto another type of podcast here. Let's pull back a bit. But okay, so with that set up, so maybe turning it back to I mean, the films feel. How to put this? Okay, I'm gonna introduce a key point about these films that I think says a lot, and we can use this for about a difference in filmmaking technique, which Oriana hinted at between the original films and the current ones. Now, Oriana mentioned about the frame rate thing, and I'll have more to say about the overall technical aspects about how these films were presented, which were heavily hyped at the time, and which again nobody cares about, nobody remembers about now, but. Famously, if you think about the Lord of the Rings films, how much was shot on site? For instance, the Eddora sequence for Rohan, what did they do? They went to an actual valley and built and constructed this mock-up of Edoras, the capital of the Rohirrim, that was actually there. Physical sets all around. You'd think as they took advantage of it. It looked beautiful. It looked amazing then. It looks amazing now. It's easily one of the best pieces of set design in this realm of epic fantasy you can ever see for a film. That was the standard for those films, not the exception. The reverse is the case for the Hobbit films. Nearly everything is done in studio with some shots that are done outside to set things up. But everything else is done in studio, and you can tell. It's really miserable. What are some of your favorite examples?
I do. It is interesting. The first one is the one that holds up the best.
I think so.
Let's say. And I think it's not a coincidence that there are lots of sequences in that movie where people are outside in real environments, and there are sets on stages. You have to use sets on stages when you're making a movie. That's fine. But they are really tangible sets for the most part. There's a few glaring issues like the whole Moria fight thing where the camera just starts pinging around like it's totally divorced from everything. I have no idea what point of view we're supposed to have. But I think actually going back to the Forgot Busters thing, it is interesting. Avatar is also kind of accused of being a Forgot Buster, but I think it had more of an effect on filmmaking than the Hobbit movies ever did. And maybe the cultural impact was around the same or
I mean, it got its own theme park.
Right.
Like The Hobbit.
The Hobbit, I guess technically the sets are there that you can visit.
The Hobbit in the store. Yeah. I've been informed it's not worth the price, but I don't know.
Ooh, shade.
I know.
But I do, like, you think about Avatar and the ways in which it, pushed filmmaking forward in a lot of ways. Whereas all of the techniques used in the Hobbit movies, I think, are bad, and no one does them. It made no impact in the realm of filmmaking itself.
That high frame rate?
It looks garbage, and when you do, it's 48 frames per second, and when you have a frame rate that high, you cannot do like matte paint. A lot of the techniques that were used in the originals, you cannot do with a frame rate that high, with the way that they were shooting it.
It's like so high def that you cannot hide anything.
You literally can't do it, and so you have to rely on either sets or CGI, which can be very effective used, properly.
Yeah.
And it was not here.
Well, the CGI thing, there are a lot of ways it's misused. But I think one of the things that works in the movie is Erebor, which looks fantastic. And because it's entirely digital, you can do whatever you want with it. And they do. And for the most part, maybe not the most part, but some of it works. But it looks good, and I don't think you could really do that to the same extent with the miniatures that they used for the other one, or a real set somewhere. So, I like Erebor, but on the flip side of that, the same level of elaborate design and camera choreographing and stuff is like the Goblin Caves, which are just as expansive, but they suck.
Yeah, the entire
because there's no
sequence.
weight to it. Yeah, because everything becomes CGI as soon as they enter it, basically. And then there's all this cartoony, Looney Tunes, or falling off bridges. We're surviving this drop that would kill an ant, and
it's just those sequences in particular. There's the Moria fight, fighting our way out of Moria sequence. There is, which is all the more infuriating because it is, sort of intercut with, it surrounds Bilbo and Gollum's riddles in the
Sorry
dark.
to interrupt. You said fighting your way out of Moria. You mean the Goblin Caves?
The Goblin Caves, right?
Yeah. Moria's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Whatever. It's
they
the
didn't
mountains.
try hard enough to keep them separate.
There's the Misty Mountains. It's all the whatever. Anyway, you're fighting out of the Goblin Caves, and there is no weight to anything, and nothing looks real, and no one gets hurt in ways that are believable. It's all just an absolute shrieking nightmare of a video game cutscene, and
it's a legion of Bugs Bunnies fighting a legion of Bugs Bunnies,
and not in a funny way either. They're trying at several different points.
It's supposed to be whimsical and fun, and it's just this is going on so long that any joy I had ever in my life
just totally. And when you have it right next to these two actors, the good scenes in this movie are just two actors in a room talking, basically. And it's in such stark contrast. I was trying to figure out, and maybe it's too early for this, because I did want to talk about the good things that this movie does, but we will. But while we're here, what was kind of the worst sequence for you? I was trying to pick between the goblin everything, the barrels out of Bond, where the dwarves all are in barrels and they're going down the river, and it's just the laws of physics.
It's almost fun.
It could be fun if it were a different movie. I feel
like Uncanny Valley version of fun, where you're this is just close enough that it's so actually depressing. Yeah.
And that's part of the. There's that one, and then I guess the entire Battle of Five Armies is just horrendous from start to finish.
That's most of the movie too.
I know. So I don't know. I couldn't pick between the three of those because they're all infuriating.
What a rich banquet.
They're all way too long. They all take something in the book that was really short and talked about in a somewhat whimsical way.
We're just having fun.
And it's just I'm just so bored watching this. Why are we doing this? I have one life on this earth. And I have spent 10 minutes of it watching CGI characters just bounce around pinging off of orcs. I don't know.
God.
Well, we should. What Oriana and Jared are saying, I'm saying too, is we should back up a bit and sort of like delve into a little more about the structure, about why these films are the way they are. Oriana already brought up the idea that a lot of it was to make money, but let's delve into a very obvious structural issue that is still worth spelling out and is very emblematic of the difference between the Lord of the Rings films, famous award-winning valorized, and these films, which again everyone wants to forget. It's a very simple thing, though. Lord of the Rings is famously a big, huge book with a lot of detail in it. To make 3 relatively streamlined, yes, they're long, but to make 3 relatively streamlined movies out of them, you have to remove a lot. You boil it down. You boil it down, you change things, you simplify, etc., but you're still reducing and adapting it. That's what adaptation does. No matter what you do, any form of adaptation changes this. If you object to something being adapted in the first place, then you have a problem with the entire process. Can't help you there. But the point is that, that's what happened with the Lord of the Rings films. And they were done not perfectly, as we talked about in our episodes on the movies, but they got more closer than we ever would have figured they would have done. And we're still amazed by that. Very, very well done in general. The reverse is happening with the Hobbit movies because you're taking a short book, a quick book, and you are blowing it up. You are expanding it, you are transforming it, you are adding things to it. And when you start adding things, as opposed to subtracting and streamlining things, you gotta be careful. It's not that you can't do that. It's not that you can't do riffs and elaborations on small amounts of things that are in the text. But you've got to be very, very careful it doesn't run away with you, which is exactly what's happened with these films. Now, we will have plenty of examples to pull off over here, and trust me, if we went over every one, we'd be recording until midnight. We're not going to keep you that long.
No.
So anything close to that. But beyond the fact that it was changed from 2 to 3 movies to begin with, which introduced a whole swath of further structural problems, is that ultimately the story in The Hobbit is a hobbit is introduced by a wizard to 13 dwarves and joins them on a quest to go get gold from a dragon. That's the story. The end. It is the beginning and end of it. There's stuff along the way, but that's the basis of the story. And for the first film, it more or less follows this. But by the time of the second film, we are off all over the place in different directions. And the whimsical tone that Oriana noted, that is very much a hallmark of the original book. In fact, that's the point. Tolkien realized as he was writing another Hobbit story that he was turning into something much more dark and different, and that became Lord of the Rings. But he didn't change The Hobbit, and I'm glad he didn't. It exists in its own realm. Is that Jackson and Cruise thought, well, we've got to sort of match what we already did. But the problem is they didn't have to.
Yeah.
But they tried too hard in doing so to do the matching. And it ruins everything. Yeah. It is the best way to put it. It makes whimsical moments into deeply serious moments that have no place. It introduces new elements and factors that were never there to begin with, that are handled in the most ridiculous, stupid way. And it ultimately gets yourself where you feel like you're watching a puree of at least 6 different films happening at once, dealing with 6 different plot lines and 6 different groups of people who have barely any connection to each other. And are we watching a war drama? Are we watching a story of intense friendship? Are we watching a very bad 1950s English comedy about terrible bureaucrats, which is seriously a huge chunk of the second film? And you're just sort of like, what? Why? And everything goes on for far too long. Yeah. And this structural issue underpins every disaster that follows from that. So I'll stop there for now. But
it genuinely, the stretching, all the added stuff, it genuinely feels like if you were watching Dune and then discovered it was an adaptation of Goodnight Moon. Thank you. I've been thinking about that for a while. There's just so much that pads it for no reason, like all the stuff with the bureaucrats in Lake Town or whatever. Like Stephen Fry, I mean, I love him. I don't think he belongs.
None of it belongs. It's weird because that stuff is technically more quote unquote. Yeah,
whimsical. It's supposed to be so funny, and it's like, is it supposed to be a statement about a fascist surveillance state?
Yeah, why?
For some reason. For some,
what is that
kids'
doing
movies
here?
are always about that, and it's so stupid. Yeah, and then in the book, the character that Stephen Fry plays just goes off in the wilderness with a bunch of gold and dies.
Yeah, it's
too greedy.
Yeah.
In here, he just gets killed in the middle of the second movie or something, or at the beginning of the second movie.
Yes, because
and then whatever arc you get about people being corrupted by greed is not really there.
No, it gets transferred onto the dwarves. There's like a huge...
Because what we really needed was the dwarves to be coded
Reinforcing.
as money-grubbing capitalists.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. The thing that Tolkien explicitly moved away from.
Yeah.
It's
shit, this is a Jewish stereotype. We should change that.
It's like, oh my
Not
God.
this movie.
I'm sorry. Hitler likes my book. I need to change things. I'm going to have a dwarf who's like a hero and values like lots of other things above gold.
Yeah.
That's...
doesn't even get interested in it.
Totally fine.
No, here we go.
we go.
Oh, we're going to reclaim our homeland and also be super about wealth.
Super. Like, the biggest structural
Nightmare-ish.
problem for me, one of the biggest structural problems for me is Bilbo's journey is his journey as a character. Like, he is this timid little guy who is like incineration. When like shout out to Martin Freeman for like being good in this movie.
Disagree.
I think he's good. I think he's good in the. I think he's good throughout. Yeah, throughout. And but like he starts off timid and grows more and more bold as the stories go on, because the structure of the Hobbit, the book, is it's more like a TV series. It's extremely episodic. It does not lend itself well to a traditional three-act structure. You have to turn this into 9 acts somehow, and they don't do it. Bilbo is essentially fully realized by the end of the first movie.
No, even so in the book, his character arc is like, I don't really want to be here. I'm kind of being dragged along. Yeah, Gandalf literally forces him out the door with no handkerchiefs or something. Like he's made to go on. He doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
In the movie, like first, like he's like, oh, actually, I do want to go. Wait for me. And there's his arc.
Yeah,
sorted.
We've solved it.
Yeah, and then the rest of his arc becomes like. So if you were on Tumblr at this point, you probably saw a ton of, or maybe only I saw a ton of like really interesting fan art.
On Tumblr, Jared? When?
Weird, right? But about Thorin and Bilbo, and that becomes the character arc, is that they're kind of in love, but not, because that you can't do that.
Got a case of the nut gaze.
Yeah, like it's, what is it, in the last movie, he's talking to Balin or something, and he's like, Thorin was my, and then he like can't talk because if he committed to anything, somebody's going to be mad at their screenwriters.
And what's a bummer is like their last scene together is genuinely, or for me, it was genuinely affecting.
No, that was
and then again, structural issues here. That is like the centerpiece of your movie to me.
Yeah. And
yet it is followed immediately by goddamn Tauriel.
Here we go.
Evangeline Lilly plays this female elf because, oopsie, there are no women in The Hobbit. Oh no.
There really aren't.
Uh-oh.
Bilbo's mom is mentioned initially and she's already dead. That's it.
Now, like, I don't want to speak for every woman. I'm a woman. It's fine. I would rather there be no women than shoehorn in someone whose entire plot is just a love triangle, which they promised Evangeline Lilly.
Shoehorned in, too.
It was a reshoot thing. They promised her, because she was like, I'm not going to do this if it's a love triangle. I just came off like 8 years of shooting a love triangle on Lost, and I'm not going to do it again. And they were like,
I did my time.
Absolutely not. Don't worry about it. And then the reshoots came around and she was like, are you kidding me? But you follow up this beautiful, the crowning moment of your entire stupid trilogy with this thing with these people that we don't really care about. We don't understand why any of this is happening. Why do they even like each other other than hot? And like, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's enough. But like, but then it's weird that Lee Pace, who plays Thranduil, the king of the wood elves, he's like, oh man, your love was so real.
Yeah. Even though he's not really actually seen them together.
He hasn't at all.
Neither have we.
She cries. So she's crying over him, and she disobeyed him to go save. She disobeyed Thranduil to go see him. But it is just like, This is not the story. This is not our story. What are we doing
If the emotional
here?
core is supposed to be Thorin and Bilbo, have Tauriel have her little...
Before.
If you have to put it in there, put
right?
it first, and then we can have the moment land with the... Yeah.
We so a little sort of unpacking the stuff from the original story here, sort of to provide some further context. As Oriana rightly notes, the farewell scene where Thorin is dying and basically he and Bilbo say farewell to each other is a very key moment in the original story. It is actually probably it's the biggest moment of heft at the very end of the story, and it's done, I think, extremely well. I think it's just some of Tolkien's best writing, period, between two characters, and I think the way that it's interpreted was better than expected, given everything that was surrounding it. But yeah, it is something that sort of builds off a larger issue, which, to go into this, can be summed up like this. So I mentioned the idea is Bilbo goes with Gandalf and the dwarves. Things happen. The first film, which, as we mentioned, is probably the best one, is the one that sets up the idea that that's what we're going to get. In other words, it's Bilbo and these bunch of dwarves, which in the book are mostly interchangeable, although they have names. There are a couple that stand out. Thorin, by default, stands out. Balin, to some degree, stands out. Fili and Kili, who are indeed Thorin's nephews, stand out. These are the ones who are a little more like, there or present. And that's generally the case in the film as well, although they spent a huge amount of time, arguably an absurd amount of time, giving every individual dwarf, every individual backstory in the universe that was never shown on screen, so that way everyone can have a dynamics and work things. It's a nice idea, but it doesn't really show on screen is the problem when you can only focus on a few anyway. What they did in the first film, and again, don't blame anyone for not remembering this, is that the one dwarf that they actually have that seems to be going to be Bilbo's friend throughout the story is played by James Nesbitt, who is the Irish actor playing Beaufort, I think, just one of the other random dwarves.
Oh, right.
And they set up a lot of scenes and dialogue between the two throughout the first film, including a very moving moment where Bilbo says he's about to go home. And so it seems like, okay, this is a new arc for the films, but it seems like they're introducing him. These actors work well together. Not a bad idea. Let's see where this goes. Second film hits, gone.
Yeah.
Third film, gone. It's sort of like, you had an idea. Why did you abandon it? Where did it go? And unsurprisingly, right around that time, Tauriel gets introduced. And well, and things go out of place. And that's the other thing. So, as Jared was pointing out, hotness has its place. And so, notably, while a number of the dwarves are essentially grotesques and made up to look like that, huge beards and all the rest of it, we have three notably hot dwarves. Unsurprisingly, they also happen to be among these lead dwarves. Thorin, who is portrayed as much younger in the movies than he's in the books, and then the even younger nephews, Fili and Kili, played respectively by Thorin, is played by Richard Armitage, wonderful deep voice, very good casting. Want to see why they cast him. And then we have Aidan Turner and New Zealand actor Dean O'Gorman playing Fili and Kili, whichever one is which. I can never get them straight. And they're all the ones portrayed as both Thorin and whichever one Aidan Turner's is, are essentially like, what if Aragorn but a dwarf? As in Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn, we should note. And then you have Dean O'Gorman going like, hi, I'm your sort of like, blonde Taylor Hawkins guy from Foo Fighters, except I'm a dwarf. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And all that. Did a good job.
When you say it like that, I don't hate it.
That's why I should have made these films.
Yeah.
So they set this up, and then the idea is that we have, again, the interesting love story that should have been between Thorin and Bilbo that we didn't get because... and then we do get the love triangle out of nowhere between Aidan Turner's dwarf and Tauriel and Orlando Bloom. I wonder why he's back. Was he a figure that was notable in Lord of the Rings? I believe so. Is that character in The Hobbit at all? No. Not in the slightest. And yet here he is. I wonder why.
That is like, just as we talked at length in our episode on the Rings of Power show about the thrall that show is into the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. And it's interesting that these films are similarly in thrall to their predecessors in that Gandalf has to be here and has to play a huge role. Elrond has to be here and play a huge role. Galadriel has to do, et cetera, et cetera.
God.
See, also Legolas. And, like, in the behind-the-scenes stuff, you can tell Orlando Bloom is, like... I don't know if he had a divorce that he had to pay for. Every single time you see an actor, usually a male actor, but sometimes, a female actor, who is in a movie and you're like, what are they doing in this movie? Almost always there was a divorce. That was very expensive. Here's a little bit of Hollywood goss for you guys.
Giving you all the secrets here on By-the-Bywater.
But so the Legolas inclusion actually kind of ruins his arc in the Lord of the Rings films because he starts off in the Lord of the Rings films anti-dwarf. We don't like dwarves. Boo. We don't really know why, but we don't need to. It's that's fine. And then his friendship with Gimli grows, and that's so nice. We love that. Super duper great. In the Hobbit films, Legolas is introduced. They get caught by the spiders, and it's after Bilbo has freed them from the spiders, or some of them, and then the elves show up, and Legolas is there, and he hates the dwarves, and it's okay, fine. He hates the dwarves, is shitty about the dwarves, and then by the end of the third movie, he saves Thorin. He saves Thorin specifically by throwing Orcrist into a giant orc, and that is his entire arc in the Lord of the Rings. Why does he hate dwarves in the Lord of the Rings movies? Because
Tauriel stole his.
But he seems fine. By the end of the Hobbit movies, he's actually he seems okay with Tauriel being in love with Keely. He goes with her.
He ships it.
He ships it. He totally does. It's he disobeys his own father to follow Tauriel to go fight with Keely or whatever. And it's so that's it. Why does he hate dwarves in the beginning of The Lord of the Rings? Because Peter Jackson is kind of at the end of his rope here, I guess.
Well, that's kind of brings up a related thought for me is why is Peter Jackson convinced that everybody in Middle-earth is completely racist? Why are all of the elves so anti-dwarf? There's backstory for that.
Yes.
But that's not what, in the books, they're just I don't really like them. And that's different. That's different.
Yeah.
That's we've got history, there's bad blood. This is more you know what, we just hate them. We're going to shoot them on sight.
Yeah. It's very weird.
In the movies, it comes across, in the book, the dwarves are imprisoned in the Wood Elf Palace, and in the book, it's you're trespassing, and they're not telling them why they're trespassing.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
In the movie, it's oh my God, a dwarf? This is a gated community. And it's what does that add?
Oh my God.
What does that add to this story?
Posting on Nextdoor about the dwarves.
I saw a dwarf in the sidewalk. Yeah, but it's all Rivendell is like that.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, and there's a conversation in Rivendell between somebody and Elrond, and he's I'm not going to let them go. I'm not
It's so bizarre. It's especially now that Rings of Power is trying to build Elrond as as a dwarf lover. He and Durin have this.
Why did you have to remind me of that?
Elf lover.
Stop.
I can throw this. If
Oh
I
my
have
God.
to.
Episode 44. That's where our is.
But yeah, it's very strange. Oh, speaking of racism, though.
Everybody's favorite topic.
But I will say this. Peter Jackson did the orcs are white. White. In these movies. And that's that's an improvement.
Yeah. Oh, and I did appreciate that Lake Town is because it's a trading community. It is a diverse community. Mm-hmm. Everywhere else is white, but
weird that all the dwarves are, just white, white and hot
as
and English
British
and
as possible. Yeah. But it is. I appreciate. I thought it was a nice.
Well, as long as we're sort of talking about it, let's try and talk of some positive stuff before we get in for the kill here and wrap it up. So we're taking some time. So what are some positive moments you like? Now, for me, there are moments. The problem is there are moments.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's things like there's one great shot where even though the whole scene that ends the first movie where it's the eagles rescuing the dwarves from the orcs is ridiculous in the execution, the scene where you see them flying away with the moonlight and all that, it's yes.
Thank
you. Tolkien would do that. Nothing else leading up up to it, but Tolkien would do that. So, and then even though the scene where it's again the cartoony scene where they're fighting their way through Goblin Town, all the rest of it, there's the one scene where it's like Iden Turner at the bottom of the dwarf pile sort of looks up with sort of horrified expression. We cut to a vision where he's seeing like a whole horde of orcs swarming down him. It's like, okay, that's a good moment. The problem is though these are moments. That's part of the thing. The other thing is that there is some good casting that works somewhere else. We mentioned Lee Pace. We have no problem with Lee Pace sitting around in a throne looking like a fashion dom going like, yes, can I help you? Because he does it so well. So that's perfectly fine. There are, and even though Radagast is a bit of a strange character.
Boo.
I'm going to throw up.
He's the worst. He's the worst. What were we? Why? Who asked for this?
I know we were trying to talk about good things, but really quickly, the scene, I think it's in the first movie, where he's trying to lead this pack of warg riders away from the people trying to get to Rivendell, and he goes in the same, like a parallel path to the dwarves. Like he's
yes.
leading them away.
What is the geography of that scene? And that's like one thing that, like, Peter Jackson had proven himself to be relatively adept at action scenes. What happened here? Why the geography of this scene where the orcs are chasing the dwarves, even though they have no reason to at that point in the story,
they're just evil.
Is just baffling. Everyone's going in circles.
It's just it's like watching it going, wait, I thought, and then aren't they? And they keep just going in parallel and seeing each other and having to hide. And why are you not leading them the opposite direction?
You're in like, yes, there's rocks, but it's like mostly open fields.
Anyway.
Also, Radagast finds a sick hedgehog, and the hedgehog is named Sebastian, and I hate that a lot.
Yeah,
but let's go back to good things.
Sebastian, we're like, he really said Sebastian, didn't he? Sebastian the hedgehog. Okay.
Look, name your hedgehog Sebastian all you want. It doesn't really fit with the naming conventions in Middle Earth.
I mean, part of the other issue about things that are good that turn out bad can be said to be the music. Now, I'll bring up this point. Howard Shore's music for the Lord of the Rings films is rightly famed as some of the best music in its. I mean, those are themes that you can hum for days. Everything about it that he did for the Lord of the Rings films is stellar. The problem with his work on the Hobbit films is not that he doesn't have some stellar work. He does, but the filmmakers lack the courage to let that work sit in its own right. So we do get things like essentially the adaptation of the Far Over Misty Mountains, the sort of the sweeping heroic theme that pops up.
Beautiful.
And disappears in the third movie. Why?
And then there's also, and even though the Toriel dwarf thing is the love theme's okay, and things like this, but the problem is it can be summed up like this. At the end of the first movie, there is a confrontation scene between a bunch of warg riders and the dwarves who've been chased up trees and all that. And then all of a sudden we get a big hero battle, very much not in the book, between Thorin and the dwarf that take too long to explain. But the point is, the music suddenly turns real familiar. You should not, after 10 years of everyone ingesting the Lord of the Rings films and having very specific ideas of what themes go with what characters and all that, you should not suddenly have, in this confrontation between a dwarf and an orc, the ring wraiths theme from Lord of the Rings. It's like, wait a minute. I still remember when I first saw it, I'm like, this is wrong. This is music for these characters, for this thing. And you slapped it in here precisely because it's familiar dramatic music. And you've therefore undercut and ruined the point of it.
Yeah.
Very, very bad filmmaking. I'm sorry, very bad editing.
If you were doing it so that it was playing for the big bad goblin, I would kind of get it. It wouldn't work totally, but I would, whatever. But the fact that it plays when Thorin is like striding heroically through the flames or whatever, it's like, you're playing the Imperial March for Luke.
Yes. That is the equivalent.
This is a good point, yes.
It is.
Very true, very true.
Baffling.
Well.
Shoot. We should probably wrap up.
We should probably wrap up. The problem is if we kept going, we would be just.
There are so many other things that we would like to say, like much about the music.
Why don't we wrap up with one last thing each that peeves us? Because I have one that I will mention as my own last thing that peeves us. This we sort of mentioned this earlier. So talking about the technical aspects and some of the things, the 3D filming, which they were big on. No one cares. Doesn't matter anymore. 3D Blu-rays. You haven't heard about those in a while. the frame rate thing, terrible indeed. My beef with it is this. I'm going to introduce a comparison point here that's musically related, but I think has a relevance. A friend of mine was a very, very, very early fan of U2. I bring this up for a reason. And really, we're talking about first 2 albums U2. But she said by the time of the 3rd album, that's What's War, that's the one with New Year's Day, etc. I was like, Bono started believing his own press. He started to lean into that voice, and it's just sort of it's Kirchner doesn't like it. I bring this up a comparison point because in Lord of the Rings, we get a lot of very notable and famous sort of swooping shots that are used every so often. Note, Alfrid, every so often. The Hobbit movies, at least one every 2 or 3 minutes. It's like, here's another impossible swoop, and here's another one, and here's another one, and here's another one. And it's just like, I'm tired. You have ruined the impact of these big sweeping shots by just making them part of your just general what you're doing.
This is how you shoot a conversation? Like,
yeah. It's sort of like, here's another sweeping thing, and it's going like, and it's just and it's these small details where you lean into something that everyone noticed and appreciated in your first work, and you make it your calling card. Bad idea. So that's my peeve. What are your last? Pick a peeve.
Yeah, right. So the one thing that stuck with me from my first really half-hearted viewing of the 3rd movie is, so in the Battle of 5 Armies, there's all the armies around the Lonely Mountain. They're gonna, they want the gold. It's sure. And so the orcs are coming, reinforcements or something. I don't remember. Who gives a shit? And so the 2nd string, whatever, they show up in these tunnels that are delved by these big sandworm things, which look
the
cool.
worms of Arrakis.
Yeah, and they look
Dune,
pretty cool. And then, but so if they have those worms, why didn't they tunnel into the mountain and just take it? Why do they have to let them out for the the orcs are theater kids,
myself,
the dramatic
I didn't realize
entrance.
that was an issue until now.
That is the only thing that I remember from my first viewing, and it's still one of maybe 5 things that I remember from watching it a week ago. Just anyway.
Well, Oriana, take us home.
I find it impossible to choose between these two. The first is Alfrid. For anyone who has not seen the movie, there's a guy in Lake Town. He's the master of Lake Town's assistant.
He's LaCroix Wormtongue.
Yeah, he's Wormtongue is the function that he is theoretically supposed to serve in the story, and yet we never see him get his comeuppance. And it's just the most insulting waste of my fucking time that I have a really hard time swallowing it even now. There are just whole scenes where it just goes on and on and on, and it's like
why hasn't somebody just killed him?
Oh my God, just send him away. Why do I have to see this? Why? You chose to make me see this, and I don't know why. It's either that or what they did to poor Billy Connolly, which you actually explained it, why this happened. So Billy Connolly is a person. He plays not Dane.
Yeah, I mean, that's the accurate pronunciation,
but He plays a dwarf king who comes to Thorin's aid, and he put on real prosthetics. They made real prosthetics for him and then replaced him entirely with CG. Now, Jared, why did they do that?
I don't remember why I said. It's because everything else is CG, yes. So he would stand out if he was a real person.
You can't have one real person in an entirely CGI field of battle, which sucks completely. Coming from the people who did, I know that filming Helm's Deep was an enormous pain in the ass, but you filmed it, you made it, it looks great. 20 plus
real
years
people
later,
standing in real water.
Yep. I know, filmmaking is
really
hard.
Miserable.
I know, but it works. So those two things are really kind of unforgivable and kind of sum up the movies in general for me. Mm-hmm. We don't like them. If you do like the Hobbit movies, I'm so sorry. I hope you continue to like them.
Out there, it's fine.
They do exist. So Godspeed, and we'll catch you on the next one. I guess.
I will say, in some slight defense, what other movie are you going to see a dragon covered in molten gold?
That's true.
Ruled. Not the circumstances of him getting covered in gold, but just the visual of this dragon like sheathed in this thing that he's wanted.
Yeah.
He's like merging with his obsession.
And then it was fine. And then
he flies off, and it's like, that's a great ending. And then it's like, gets shot. Whatever.
That's it.
Yeah.
Again,
but
moments.
where else are you going to see that?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, we will wrap up with the main thing there, but we still have to talk about what will be on our next episode. The choice of topic comes around to Jared. Jared, what are we talking about next time?
We're going back in time in a few ways. We are kind of revisiting something we already talked about, and it's very old. A while back, we did an episode about Gawain and the Green Knight, or Gawain and the Green Knight, or whatever. But in that same volume, there is a work called Sir Orfeo, also translated by Tolkien. And I want to look at that because we've been in Middle-earth for a long time. Can you do that?
That's great.
Right.
That's great. I donated that book like when we moved from New York to the West Coast.
You should have known I was going to make you revisit that.
Got to hold on to these things, so and all that, because it wasn't just Middle-earth with Tolkien. There's more certainly going on there, but that's a very good choice, and that'll be allow us to get a little more interestingly esoteric with that one. Been a long time since I read that poem.
Middle English adaptation of the Orpheus legend, and it was never published during his lifetime. But Christopher Tolkien found it in his papers, and as with everything else he found in his papers, put it out for the world to see. So,
hey, people bought it.
Man.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So, and all that. Well, that has wrapped it up. You've listened to us vent a bit, and we needed to get that off our chest, and you were here to
You're all our therapists.
Deeply appreciate it. So, anyway.
You were so good. You were such a good audience.
We thank you all very much. And to everyone listening on the Discord as well, and to everyone who will be hearing this once it goes live here soon enough as an edited episode. But we made it to 50 episodes. We hope to do another 50 and more. We'll figure out ways to do it somehow and all that. Who knows? Maybe we'll even come back to these movies one day.
No.
Probably not. So we'll wrap up there. So again, thank you all very much for listening. We all appreciate it. You can find us on social media and all sorts of places. It was Twitter, but well, you know. And
it's still Twitter.
Yeah, it's sort of there. Yeah, so we're sort of scattered around. You'll find us as we do. And of course, our main site is megaphonic.fm/by-the-bywater. There is an episode guide there to check out all our past episodes if you want to know what we talked about and when. We are working our way through the actual Lord of the Rings movies. We will be doing the Return of the King sometime later this year. So, hey, that'll be good. So, in the meantime, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you all very much, everyone here. We appreciate it. Thanks to Passages Bookshop for hosting everything, and we really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Get home safe. It's a Saturday night. Relax. Do whatever you need to do. We're going to chill with all our friends. It's been a long day, but we loved every minute of it. Thank you all again very much. Until next time.